I pride us in our promptness. I don't want to rush anything, but I'm mindful that we have a lot of work this afternoon and that the roads are going to go downhill. And so we'll move through things, taking all the time we need, but expeditiously. Any introduction is necessary. Yes, we should probably go around and introduce ourselves so that Charlene knows who we all are. Jenny?
I am Jenny Stack, State Librarian. Ann Kish, Commissioner. I work at the University of Montana Western.
Marla Stark of the State Library.
Tracy Cook, State Library.
Chris Schmidt, State Library.
I'm Charlene Forthold. I'm the CEO of the Montana History Foundation.
Evan Hammer, State Library. Kenny Arledge, Commissioner, MSU Bozeman.
Elsie Arntzen, Commissioner, Superintendent of Public Instruction.
Bruce Newell, Commissioner.
Head Commissioner.
Chair. So, good.
And we have Ken and Aaron online, and I just want to make sure that they can hear us and we can hear them.
And this is Aaron, Commissioner in Browning. I can hear you fine.
This is Ken Wall,
And I
Commissioner Missoula.
understand from Ann yesterday that the previous meeting that we had a little bit of trouble with folks hearing. So for those of you who, if you speak from the back, I'm going to ask you to sort of swing around and get better access somehow to the microphone so that the other folks can hear.
And it sounds like we can hear you okay, if you can hear us okay.
Ken, are you there?
Yes, sorry. I'm here, and this is Ken Wall from Missoula, and I can hear you fine.
Perfect. And Aaron?
Does Aaron have a mic, or is she just chatting? Okay.
Yes, I had already introduced myself. This is Aaron. Can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can't. We can now. We apparently had the volume off. How can you see out your windows?
Yes, but nobody can come in or leave right now, so I'm stuck in Browning
So you're warm and safe?
and in the library.
Oh, amazing!
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. Well, that was gutsy. Well, thank you, Aaron and Ken, for joining us, and stay warm and stay safe. So the first thing on our agenda is approval of the December 13th minutes. Or any comments, corrections? Do I hear a motion to approve them?
I move to approve.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? All in favor of approving the December 13th, 2017 minutes? Signify.
Aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Move right into the State Librarian's report.
Thank you very much. I guess I'll start with maybe a little bit of an update about some evaluation that we're doing of our minutes process, and it's tied to the discussion that we had back in December about evaluation that's going on of particularly library and education websites to support ADA compliance. One of the areas that we know we're lacking in ADA compliance is closed captioning in all of our videos. And so we've been evaluating different options, including what OPI is doing to make use of YouTube's AI to create a script that provides closed captioning for videos that we produce, things like audio trainings, webinars, any kind of web tutorials and that kind of thing. And in thinking about the impact on staff workload, one of the things that we're going to evaluate is whether or not we can use the recordings that we're creating with closed captionings to help us with our minute-taking process. If you've looked at all at the minutes of legislative hearings, their minutes for many of their committees are what they refer to as logs, minute logs, where they note the time of a discussion in the log, and then it links to the recording of those meetings where people can follow through for fuller discussion. Staff are currently testing the different tools that we use for maintaining our recordings. We currently have a Vimeo channel. They're evaluating workflow and process to determine how best to make use of a closed captioning AI, whether or not we want to continue to make use of Vimeo or if we want to migrate to YouTube. And Marlis and I are going to be evaluating how we might make use of those tools to help produce full, rich minutes, but in a way that simplifies and reduces the staff time involved with that. So we're going to use this meeting as our first test. And of course, the first test is making sure we hit record. So I'm glad to see we made that first step.
Cindy, can you clarify what you mean by AI in this case?
The artificial intelligence behind YouTube's video process. You can upload a video to YouTube, run the AI against it, and it will produce a script of the recording.
I haven't done that before. Is that a free functionality?
My understanding is that it is.
Oh.
Mhm. So we've been testing it with a number of our different kinds of recordings. Yeah. So we have to do it. We should be doing it for ADA compliance. If there's a way we can make use of it that helps with our staff load, then that's a good thing too. I'm going to jump through a number of different updates. Auditors are here conducting our FY16-17 financial compliance audit. It's a little bit different this year. Typically they will come midway through a biennium to do a review of the first fiscal year and then do a lot of their pre-audit work at that time for the next fiscal year. The Legislative Audit Division has been behind in their work, and so we have auditors here. They've been here for 2.5 weeks at this point and are thinking they'll be here for another potentially 1.5 to 2 weeks. So working through pretty much everything in the financial office at this point in that amount of time. But we welcome them and their involvement, working very closely with Chris on that effort. We'll talk a little bit more when we get into our work session and funding discussions about some discussions that staff have been having coming out of the Environmental Quality Council hearings that we've been involved in. I think most of you know that as a part of the EQC work plan, they're doing a study of the Natural Heritage Program funding model for that program. And so we've testified before the EQC now a couple of different times in the last year. First, just to give the council an overview of the program, the data, tools, and resources that we make available. We presented in January about the current funding model that exists and are reliant on federal monies as well as project dollars to shore up the funding given the loss that we've been experiencing. We'll be presenting to them in March about some funding opportunities that we potentially see going forward. And like I said, we'll have an opportunity to visit about what that might look like when we get to our work session this afternoon. We had intended to bring you a draft of a broadband pay plan policy. At this meeting, we talked about it at your December meeting, and to remind you, the state is creating a new broadband pay plan policy coming out of an audit that was conducted in the last biennium of how agencies were implementing the broadband pay plan. We've met with the Department of Administration to talk through the different elements that will go into that plan. We feel like we want to let a few other agencies tackle that first to try to see what their policies might look like before we kind of put ourselves out there on the leading edge. And there really aren't any other examples out there and available for us yet, so we haven't gotten very far in drafting anything. But in thinking about what a policy might look like, importantly, we will be required to adopt a new policy every 2 years. And so that really lends itself to thinking about the fiscal environment that we're in and thinking about the opportunities for how we might support pay for our employees, including things like understanding what may have just been passed through the legislative process. If there's any kinds of opportunities as a result from vacancy savings. In the past, we've done bonuses and that kind of thing. So really using the process of updating the policy to evaluate the fiscal environment that would help inform how we compensate our employees. So I think what we're kind of envisioning in a policy going forward is a really clear understanding of what our pay philosophy is as the starting point for the policy. Where do we want to bring employees in when they're starting in a new position? How does that pay relate to existing employees' salaries, and how are we doing in maintaining pay equity? Again, really clearly defining what that pay philosophy is, and then understanding the fiscal environment and how it might impact our ability to support that philosophy through the biannual update of the broadband pay plan policy itself. That approach kind of makes sense?
I think that what Jenny talks about is that approach is what they had intention for this policy too, because you're every 2 years is following the legislative session. So you're supposed to see what your budget came out like, if they came in with a pay plan, and then you update your broadband pay policy. I think you have like 2 to 3 months after the session to do that. So I think where Jenny's going with it, and where we're talking about going with it, is really the intention of what they envisioned with this whole plan. So, and that's why they're requiring now to update it every 2 years.
What I'm doing is I'm springboarding that with onboarding and offboarding employees. So it's that whole look and to see also the performance reviews and things like that. And I know for me being there now just a year, that's where we are at this point. But using this as a opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Have we updated our sort of work calendar to reflect this process?
The work plan includes general policy reviews. I don't know that we've specifically called out this particular policy as one of our priorities.
It might be good to kind of just sort of put that in there, because it sounds like it'll have a sort of a routine, regular sort of cycle, and we can just sort of anticipate that. And for commissioners coming on, it would kind of, they could look at that and would tell them, here's some personnel stuff, which potentially could take some time that's coming up.
Right. And to your point, as we're going through a legislative process, for example, and I'm bringing you updates about the pay plan that's going through the session, you have the context of the pay plan policy to consider that legislative action that's going forward. Good. We're making significant progress on 4 RFPs that we've been talking about over the last several months. The first, of course, is the RFP to hire a consultant to help us create some kind of nonprofit to support libraries and information services around the state. The responses to that RFP have come in. The RFP review committee that includes our leadership, as well as Bruce and Ann, Amy Sullivan from the Montana Community Foundation, Jeannie Ferris from the Whitehall Community Library, and Leslie Modrow from the Billings Library Foundation all serve on that review committee. We have a pre-screening meeting with state procurement on Friday, and then they'll open up the responses to the committee for individual scoring, and then we'll schedule some time to meet. We're hoping the last week of February to do consensus scoring before offering a contract to hopefully one of the respondents. So, great progress there.
Have we set a time for Friday?
Yes.
2 o'clock.
I think it's 2:30 to 3:30.
Oh, 2:32. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a half-hour pre-screening, but we couldn't get everybody all together at one time, so we're going to spread it out over that hour, and you can be there for the whole time or the first half or the second half.
Okay, good.
And procurement will repeat that, the information they're sharing.
So are you anticipating a July 1 start for this?
I would
consultant?
hopefully sooner than that. Yeah, exactly. I had hoped by March 1. I hadn't anticipated the length of time it takes to work with procurement. So, but maybe by April 1.
It'd be nice to have something to announce at Montana Library Association
It'd be nice to have
conference.
something to announce there and potentially even have a consultant at the Library Association conference.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. So that
That kind of completes our contract with, or not completes, but furthers our contract with the membership of the association,
Yeah.
who we consulted about this.
exactly.
So it kind of continues that process of keeping the process open.
The second RFP is the one to hire a contractor to help us with a public awareness campaign. This process has been a little bit more frustrating. It went out on the same timeline as the RFP for the nonprofit consultant. We were not made aware until responses came due that procurement hadn't included in their notification the list of vendors that we had asked them to include when the procurement was issued. And so we had about a half a dozen or so vendors we wanted to ensure were notified and had a chance to respond, and that didn't happen. And so we opted to extend the deadline for responses until the first week of March. So that one's about 3 weeks behind where we hoped it would be. And similarly, we have a mix of staff as well as representatives from the Library Association and the Montana Association of Geographic Information Professionals serving on that review committee. And so they're ready as soon as we get those responses from back. The two other procurements that we're involved in working with state procurement, we've actually decided to go through a bid process rather than formal RFPs. The first is the digital conversion project for our analog collection of talking books from our talking book library. The reason we've decided to go with bids for both of these procurements is that we're asking vendors to meet really set standards that already exist. So it's a fairly black and white process in evaluating whether or not a contractor has the resources to produce quality products that meet those standards. The bid for the Talking Book Library is now out on the street. It went out to, I think, around 90 vendors, including half a dozen or so that we recommended, 2 of which we know have done these kinds of conversions for the National Library Service in the past. And responses to that bid are due at the end of the month. Erin Harris, who's our recording program coordinator, she'll be out a little bit at the first part of March, and so we'll be scoring or reviewing those responses mid-March. Again, with the bid process, it's just the low bid is selected as long as they can demonstrate that they can meet the standards. And there's an opportunity to evaluate that and go through a reference check process and that kind of thing to ensure we're comfortable with them, and then ultimately low bid would be selected. Similarly, with the Next Generation 911 GIS data assessment process, that's been a bit of a roller coaster back and forth. I think we told you earlier that initially we were prepared to move forward with an RFP. The State Information Technology Services Division is going forward with an RFP to select a contractor to do a statewide Next Gen 911 plan for the state. And we had made a decision to roll the GIS data assessment into that planning RFP. And we felt like that made a lot of sense because it would ensure that as a contractor's drafting that plan, they're using the data gathered through the assessment to help inform that plan. I think there were some concerns coming out of state procurement that any contractor that had the expertise to draft the plan might not also have the expertise to do the GIS data assessment, so they encouraged us to separate those two processes into 2 procurements. And so again, we're going to go ahead with our own procurement through a bid process. Similarly, it would be a low bid vendor, but someone who has demonstrated that, in this case, we're asking that the vendors demonstrate that they have done these GIS assessments for a large number of jurisdictions, as we would have here in the state of Montana. And that bid has been submitted to procurement, and they said they hoped to get it out this week. So we're waiting for procurement to post it. Any questions about our procurements? We usually don't have 4 procurements rolling at any one time, so this is a lot for us, and of course some of this was on hold in the fall when we were concerned about budgets. So lots of stuff moving forward at this point. The timelines for all of these projects, again, we hope to have the 2 consultants under contract as soon as possible. The contract for the nonprofit consultant is 18 to 24 months until we feel like we have sort of that turnkey nonprofit that we expect to come out of that work. For the public awareness campaign, it would run through June 30th of 2019, taking us through the next legislative session. The bid process for the Talking Book digital conversion, we anticipate that it would take somewhere between 6 months and a year to complete that process. We hope to be under contract by May 1 for that one. We don't have a solid timeline yet on the GIS data assessment. I don't know that it'll take too long to complete that assessment. We do have to do an initial report to the EDIC, Energy and Telecommunications Interim Committee. Is that what? They're the interim committee that drafted the 911 language or legislation that went through the last legislative session, and so we'll give them an update on our progress at their September interim committee. Anything I'm forgetting about any of these procurements? In the midst of all of this work, we did have a significant contract issue come up last month. I think most of you are familiar with our statewide courier program. We've used Critelli couriers for a number of years now, and the state library has maintained that contract, although libraries have very direct relationships in working with Critelli. On a Monday morning in mid-January, Kara got a call from Critelli that as of that day, they were no longer able to service our contract. And we had crates of books in mid-transit all around the state and libraries with crates of books expecting Critelli to pick them up that day. And so the staff just did a really, really incredible job to pick up that very heavy ball and run with it. Critelli did complete transit that day. We went for, I think, about 10 days, maybe not quite 2 weeks, without a statewide courier. Libraries who had local options were able to get those local operations up and running in very short order. For our shared catalog libraries, it meant a lot of work for our shared catalog staff who run a great deal of administrative reports and systems processes behind the scenes to ensure that the data is available for libraries to help them transit books through the courier process. So they had to put a lot of those reports on hold and reconfigure a lot of the reports to accommodate different kinds of courier scenarios that were operating. Kara worked very closely with procurement to solicit bids for couriers for an interim period. So we have a courier working on a 90-day interim, and we'll be going out for an RFP process to select a new statewide courier this spring. Our understanding is that Critelli had a major medical courier contract that they lost, and it was really that was sort of their bread and butter and shoring up the rest of their lines of business, and without that contract they were not able to continue our line of work. But it was incredibly distressing for staff that we weren't given any kind of notification. Of course, the contract required them to give us some kind of notification, but procurement found in this situation that there was really very little recourse.
The 3 libraries that I go to almost every day wanted to express a big thanks to Kara for the wheels spinning so quickly on that.
Yes, she did an incredible job.
Were there any monetary penalties written into her contract with Critelli? Is that being considered for?
That'll be something that we'll consider in any kind of new contract. You know, I think state procurement did reach out to them to find out what the situation was and what kind of recourse we had, and the response was, you know, they were literally going out of business. They'd laid off staff. The business was ceasing to exist.
It's not unheard of to require a bond to be placed in escrow in these kinds of things. our exposure in terms of service is large enough that it might be worth at least considering that.
Mhm.
For the libraries in my area, it doesn't even appear that it's not Critelli, except the name on the bill will be different because it's the same people and the same trucks.
Oh,
Yeah, I think the staff had a heads up that this was coming.
Yeah.
Some of them were quitting, starting their own businesses because they knew that it was coming. But you know, I guess I'm very disappointed with Critelli that they didn't notify us that we were at risk. I used to be so excited when I saw that Critelli van going up the interstate. A few funding updates. Coal severance tax funding continues to come in little by little. I think as of last week, you know, we had paid our OCLC and our shared catalog bills prior. We now owe libraries their Federation grant funds totaling $176,000. As of last week, we had $166,000 in the account, and so we're almost ready to pay those. Grant awards, we're targeting the end of February to be able to do that. Again, this is a learning process for us as we figure out what the cash flow is going to be like into our new account for those funds. I think we determined we were at about 57% of collections based on what was appropriated to us in the last legislative session. And according to the most recent legislative revenue estimates, collections are looking to be on line with what was projected during the legislative session in House Joint Resolution 2. So we remain hopeful that we'll see close to what was appropriated to us. Some things that we have yet to fund, not having money in that account, are some of the ongoing digitization work that we fund for state publications digitization. There's a little bit that we would like to do there this year. And then, of course, still for us to consider are any available monies that we might be able to give libraries in lieu of some of the state aid that was lost this year. You know, our hope was to be able to have some additional coal severance tax monies to backfill some of that loss this year. I think we'll still want to consider whether or not we have the ability to do that given what we're learning about the cash flow in that account. So I don't think we're ready to pull the plug on that idea yet, but it's something for us to be watchful for as more money comes into that account. And then an update on our Library Services Technology Act funding. It's an interesting position to be in. I think we're really in the same position we were in last year, where we don't have an FY18, a federal year FY18 budget yet, or an award, although the fiscal year started October 1. And now the President's FY19 budget is out, and he is again calling for the defunding of the Institute of Museum and Library Services and the federal funding that would then go to libraries. And we're already beginning to see the advocacy calls to support that federal funding. What we know about the FY18 funding remains as what I've told you. Congress seems to be supportive of at least level funding, if not a slight increase in funding to IMLS for FY18. We hope that if they pass an omnibus bill in mid-March, that will include all of that funding and that IMLS will be able to make our official FY18 award. What's a little bit different there than where we sat last year is that I think IMLS has done a better job of communicating where we are. Last year, we were really put into a bit of a frenzy because IMLS gave all state libraries a partial award that was about 20% less than what we had received in previous years. And when they made that award, they included language in the award that any additional funding was subject, of course, to congressional appropriation, but also to IMLS discretion, and nobody knew what that meant, and IMLS was not very good about clarifying what they meant. And so we were very, very concerned that we would not receive that full appropriation. And of course, we ultimately did receive that appropriation. What's different this year is that IMLS has reached out to all state libraries and made an offer of partial funding to state libraries that need it, rather than taking the across-the-board approach, and has assured us that once the appropriations come from Congress, there'll be an opportunity for a full award. And so I feel like we have a better sense of IMLS's approach to the funding situation than we had a year ago. We are not in a situation where we need a partial award. We are able to get through to September 30th. So if Congress were not to act on the FY18 budget until that point in time, we feel like we would be okay. And then, of course, hoping that in March we'll have an omnibus bill that includes that appropriation. As a reminder, that omnibus bill came in early May in 17, so we're actually a couple months or 6 weeks earlier than we were a year ago. And then, of course, we're in the same situation we find ourselves with Trump's budget, but we're reminded that there was this huge outpouring of support from around the country to Congress to support that funding, and ultimately we're seeing Congress step up, and so we don't anticipate that Congress's view on the funding will change, and it's of course ultimately up to them to pass the budget.
So just as a reminder, directly supported by LSTA in Montana is what, the shared catalog,
OCLC Group Services,
OCLC Group Services,
all of the consultants,
all the consultants, so all the consulting,
trainers, some staff for the shared catalog,
training,
the career project that we just talked about, all of our lifelong learning and early literacy programming, the Montana Memory Project, Talking Book Library with our loss of general fund to support Talking Book. That's significantly funded by LSTA now.
1 million with the project.
Yeah.
So just for the record, I mean, I think there's a lot at stake, and I think that we need to seize every opportunity we have to let people know that, I mean, I think it's less useful to talk about state library staff, frankly, politically, than it is to talk about these programs which directly affect Montanans' lives.
Right.
Indirectly, of course, we're supporting staff who I don't want to be mistaken. I love the staff and value their services. But I think we need to be able to trot out this sort of litany of the kind of services that would be directly harmed by this going away. This would be awful. And I'm quite concerned about it, frankly, because if for nothing else, it just is this ongoing sort of it's a dumb way to run a railroad. Are we going to have a bridge over the Missouri this year or not? This is an important thing.
Well, and if some of you saw an email that I sent and it's been shared with staff and to Wired, I think we run the risk of becoming numb to the concerns. If this becomes the norm in how we're appropriating monies and trying to efficiently run programs that have direct benefit on people's lives, if we allow our policymakers to continue to appropriate monies in this way, nothing's going to change, and the advocacy at some point is bound to drop off or become less effective if that's the norm we continue to operate under. That's my significant concern.
Well, these are the LSTA is so important to Montanans.
We'll talk a little bit more when we get to the work session about the executive planning process and what that looks like going forward. We've received an initial timeline of instructions from the Governor's Office of Budget and Program Planning. We should receive tomorrow on February 15th instructions about an executive program review that we will need to conduct. This is something new and different that we've not done in the EPP process before. So I really can't give you a lot of information about what that's going to look like. If I were to surmise, it would be that we're going to be asked to provide information about our programs, especially in light of the cuts that we've taken and the impact where those pain points currently exist coming out of the budget cuts. This is different than what we've done in the past, where we have prepared kind of a wish list of budget requests and ideas for new programs and requests for funding. Elsie, since you're new to this, and to remind the commission, the way we've operated in the past is that program managers have worked with staff to identify opportunities for funding and budget requests. The management team has worked to prioritize those and share them with the commission, and the commission has ultimately approved those budget requests, and then they're submitted as part of the budget planning process. We don't believe that the EPP process this year is going to include creating those kinds of wish lists of ideas, and probably largely because of the financial situation of the state. And in lieu of that, we'll be going through this program review process. According to the timeline that we received, that program review will be due back to OBPP on April 16th. And so once we see those instructions tomorrow and have a little better understanding of what that process actually looks like, we'll be able to better inform the commission about your role. At a minimum, I'm sure we'll be able to share with you anything that we prepared at your April commission meeting prior to submitting them the following week, that Monday after your April commission.
Of course, our work session this afternoon is sort of helping inform the commission and give us a chance to discuss and sort of set the stage for some of that discussion that's ongoing with the executive.
Exactly.
So in the April meeting, we'll have to be able to approve the list of the EPP requests.
I don't believe we'll be doing a list of EPP
Okay,
requests this
okay,
year.
okay.
Exactly. Yep. I think that will be different from what we've seen.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Maybe this is an appropriate time to once again thank Chris. Lord.
I'll be very interested to see what kinds of information they're asking for and what we'll be able to share as part of the program review. Elsie, will your agency be going
No.
through?
Well, similar.
Okay.
I mean, what you're suggesting is what we've done as well. You come from within, you rise to the top. They come to management, to myself, to say what possibilities could there be. And even within this process, we're doing exactly what we've done before, just to get a clear indication. We're larger with 300 and some employees, so that's a little bit different.
Sure.
With different divisions, but still it's important to hear what staff requests and would like, knowing what the reality of it might be. What I would say to you, Jenny, is to make sure that your discussion with the budget director and throughout that process that you get things in writing. I mean, it's that's what I would go from. Things are very in flux at this point, and if you have something that's written, you could then say, well, in regard to this, and then you keep a journal on all of that regarding the written. And that indeed may not be enough to have anything happen at the end, but I would definitely do that. And I would press. I would press for things that have been there. So coming to that then on the historic note, how many of the processes, if we use the past and previous EPP process, how many were placed in the governor's budget?
Let's see. Last EPP process was of course negative. The EPP process prior to that was when we got the water information system position. So
It's varied.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and it all depends on the revenue and, the governor that's in there. You know, a lot of times we'll get an arbitrary, you can ask for 5%. Prioritize up to 5%.
And what's interesting, and you'll remember this, my first legislative session was 2013, and the sort of popular approach was one-time only money. They'll approve one-time only money. And so we had a couple of different one-time only requests that were approved. That was actually when we did a pilot to test the need for and demonstrate the value of a water information system position. And we had our first round of funding to do the Talking Book Library digital conversion in that one-time only in 2015 is when they capped the growth to, I think, 3%, and it pretty much covered our IT and rent fixed costs. So there's a little bit of that flavor of the day approach to the budget as well. So it's definitely mixed. We've always tried to align our budget requests with the priorities of the governor, so demonstrating how the initiatives support education and economic development and efficiency in government. So definitely mixed success.
But definitely when I did call on this, because this is different than what we've ever done, and when I did, I tried to email on it, tried to get something in writing. Doesn't happen very much over there. And they called me back and just said they aren't saying EPP anymore for this session because there is no wish list with the revenues down. And they will be not asking for a wish list, just this program review. I mean, you could tell what was coming very distinctly. So there will not, she told me, there will not be an EPP.
It's still a process within, and also with the commission's leadership. The process within, I think, is still valued, even though the horizon may not look as green as wanted. And still that wish list and goal building.
And I don't know that we're at a wish list or we're at a program review. I don't know that what we would share at this point would be very different, because we really are focused on what were the impact of the budget cuts.
Sure.
What are the needs right now? What are our top priorities? And as we've talked about, we're really feeling pain points in our Talking Book Library staff and in our IT staff. And so I think whether it was an EPP wish list or communicating that via a program review, those are still going to be our top priorities in talking about.
Well, it makes our discussion this afternoon even more important in that we need to explore alternative ways of funding what needs to happen, and step back and take a look at things. But the fact that we've been a lot more disciplined about our planning and about identifying outcomes and effects on people's lives, I think that it's going to be an easier job for the commission to basically identify those things that we really go to bat for, possibly outside this process. It sounds as if maybe the executive processes here will be just sort of a, here it is, just sort of a almost pro forma review. It could be, because there may not be perceived to be any flexibility. So here it is. Knock yourself out next fiscal year.
And I did want to let you know that Siri Smiley will be joining us a little bit later this morning for our work session. And so we'll have a chance to ask some questions about what she knows about the process. Okay. Just a couple of other things as I wrap up my report. Debbie Wellman, who has been the Federation coordinator for the Pathfinder Federation, has retired. I think her last day was last week before last. And one of her employees is stepping in as, I believe, acting. Is that true, or has she been appointed? So you won't see Debbie anymore at your Federation updates. She's taken an opportunity to play with grandbabies, so I think she's excited about that. And that Federation will be electing a new coordinator at their spring meeting. So we certainly wish her well.
What library is it likely that the new coordinator likely to come from? Interesting.
I think we've been told that they may continue to meet in Fort Benton. It's such a nice library and such a central location to that Federation. I'm not sure who else.
Is there any interest in Great Falls?
No, I'm not sure. I think Kathy would do it needed, but she has her own challenges. Might prefer a smaller library, take that leadership role.
And just finally, a little tickler and a point that we'll be celebrating this year. It's the 50th anniversary of the Talking Book Library this year. And so we have just begun talking about what kind of celebration we want to hold. We're tentatively targeting possibly around your August commission meeting, some kind of event, but haven't gone too much farther in our planning, but we'll be working more with staff on what that potentially looks like. I'm probably making a trust request for that, for some kind of event to occur to celebrate the Talking Book Library.
So our meeting is scheduled for the 8th.
Mm-hmm. Any questions for me?
Hearing none, shall we move to Chris, your second quarter financial report?
Sure. Presented in front of you is fiscal 18 second quarter financial report. And I'll just kind of thumb through this real quick and point out a couple highlights and then open it up to you guys if you have any distinct questions. So second quarter, we're halfway through the fiscal year. I can tell you we've kept spending and operations very low right now as we monitor where we're going and how much other money we have to make up in certain situations. But included in this budget is a statutory appropriation. You guys are well aware of this $80,000. Jenny just talked about it. House Bill 61 for the Next Generation 911. We received the cash and we've talked about it and stuff, but I had to go behind and bring up the actual appropriation to spend that $80,000. So that now is included in your budget as a statutory appropriation, one time only $80,000 authority to spend, and we have received the cash from D of A to spend that funds. And Jenny talked about where we're at in the getting that contract out to do that. So that one will be flowing through your budget. As far as the trust, State Library Trust, you can see that 3 expenditures amounts have came out of there, and the 3 areas it came out for, the consultant and the volunteer appreciation and the digital conversion. You can see some of these projects are just, well, the digital conversion is just beginning. But again, you guys have approved these projects, and you'll see these throughout your financial report as expenditures happen. And just keeping you up to date on those. The next thing down is your special session. These are the 2 areas where our budget was affected by the special session. Both of these are fixed cost areas. So the state share holiday is they passed a bill to give 2 months, basically insurance-free cost to the agencies to make up that. Just as a highlight on that, we pay about $1,054 per month per employee towards their insurance costs. And so for 2 months, we will not be paying that. But they took our cash the same way. So basically, it's a wash. Put it back into the general fund. The other one is the state ITSD reduction. Again, this is a fixed cost and basically comes out a wash. They took that appropriation and that funding away, and in turn, D of A, IST will not bill us for that amount. So both of those are areas that don't, knock on wood, hurt the state library's budget. The highlight on LSTA grant funding is you will see 2 financial reports for each of the projects that I think start back on page 7. You'll have LSTA 16, which is the final report that you will see on that. We are closing out, well, we did close out December 30th, but by the time it comes to you guys, it's in this financial report that you see it. And then opening all those projects up on LSTA 17 award. So for your next financial report, you will only see the LSTA 17 award carrying forward. Digital Library had 1 contract. This is with the Natural Resource Conservation. Had an increase of an ongoing contract of about $40,000 for fiscal 18, increasing that total budget to about $60,000. And then just on your financial report, on page 2, you'll see the Montana State Library Trust, and you'll see, again, the expenditures that have came out of it, the donations. You can see the big will amount that we were left, the Smith will amount. And so that brings up that trust account to basically the 1.9 million that you're looking at. On page 3 at the very bottom, you'll see the Montana Land Information Account. Again, that is invested in the STIP account too, and you'll see it sits at $1.1 million. On page 4, you'll see at the very bottom, the Montana Shared Catalog. That is their self-funded amount that we keep track of, and you can see their cash balance is about $157 as the year goes through. I think most libraries have paid. I think there's a few stragglers they're working on to get the final amount in for fiscal 18. And then, like I said, on page 7 starts some of the LSTA projects that you guys get an individual financial report for. And again, you'll see there's 2 sheets for each one. At the very top, it will say LSTA 16 and LSTA 17. And I open it up for questions.
I want to maybe begin by giving Ken and Aaron a chance to ask a question or not.
This is Ken. I don't have any questions at this point.
Thank you, Ken.
I also have no questions at the moment.
Thank you, Aaron.
I have a question.
Kenny.
Back to page 4, the Montana Shared Catalog, you stated an amount left of $157.
That's where the cash balance sits. So that's
Am I supposed? Oh, there.
The
Okay, at the bottom.
very bottom.
Just looking across the other one.
Yeah, no, down at the cash balance, what their checking account has.
I understand that the shared catalog is a sort of an ongoing proposition. Typically, what is their minimum balance experienced during the year?
Well, we collect all those funds usually up front, so they start coming in May, April, June, July. So most of that cash is collected up front, and then the expenditures are spent throughout the year. So you'll see that typically going down as the year goes down. Usually we end right around $35,000 to $40,000 that they keep as a balance. So right now projecting, I think they're right on track.
Great. And does the shared catalog, are they comfortable with that sort of a buffer? Sort of not really a reserve fund formally, but that's working for them as well?
Yes, it is actually. They kind of trust Chris. We've worked closely with her to determine what's an acceptable ending balance to manage the cash flow.
And our cash needs, our needs for this funding have kind of changed over the history of the shared catalog. You know, when we had large servers here that we maintained, those were very, very expensive servers. And so a lot of this funding was collected in order to do server upgrades. And as we migrated to virtual servers and now have gone to a software as a service model, there's no longer that need to build that amount of money over time to have those kinds of large expenditures. We really don't have significant large expenditures that happen infrequently anymore with the catalog. The budgeting is more annual, ongoing.
Yeah, and definitely that ending fund balance has been a work in progress. We've been, I mean, at one point when we first started, it was up to close to 100,000, and have slowly brought it down. But I think we're to the point we don't want to bring it down anymore. So the shared catalog's goal will be whatever they collect or bill out during that year should come close to matching those expenditures. So there should be a wash, whatever their budget is, they should be collecting per year now to keep that balance right where we need it to be. So, and you haven't seen that in the past. It will, I think it starts fiscal 19, I would say.
Yeah.
It needs to really balance out now because we don't want to get it any lower.
It's about 10% roughly of their overall.
Yeah, you want about 3 months because basically what you're trying to cover is, like Jenny, is the personal services is your big one. Make sure you have 3 months worth to cover personal services, and then any big any like maintenance that has to be paid the 1st of July and stuff. Those first ones coming in. So,
Great.
so I think it's right where we want it to be.
So the annual subscription cost for that shared catalog is, what, is it about $360?
The
The
total
actual
budget.
payment to CC Finance.
Yeah.
It's closer to, it's about 200,000.
So I'm going to repeat the question
Yeah.
for Ken and for Aaron. The annual cost to Cersei is how much? And Stacy responded,
Tracy.
Tracy responded about
200,000.
Yeah.
200,000.
Yeah.
But that cost is a combination of funds. So it's membership, but we also
Mhm.
place general fund and or coal severance tax funds to reduce the cost for the libraries. So it's not just the membership paying that 200,000, the full 200,000.
Right, but the annual subscription fee is about $200.
Yeah.
My apologies, Stacy.
Yeah.
I was trying to remember the number, the 200,000.
Mhm.
Apparently my brain is only partially working today. Any other questions or comments about the second quarter financial report?
I would just point anyone who's interested, and we can show you at another time, but on the shared catalog webpage, which is linked from the State Library's webpage, is the shared catalog budget. So you can see what those costs are, including the subscription and staffing costs, and then what libraries pay in. And the other point I would make is, we want to, as I think Tracy said, keep the costs low for libraries. So
Yes.
That's been the real balancing act.
And it sounds very much like you're finding sort of that balance point. It's wonderful. Well, I'll invite a motion to accept the second quarter financial report.
I move to accept the second quarter financial report.
And do I hear a second?
Second.
Kenny?
I second.
Oh, Aaron seconds. Thank you very much. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? And I didn't hear any abstentions, so that passes unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. It's always, it makes sense, and you do a good job of explaining those parts that are tough for us. Don't live with it every day. Well, we have a special guest. Charlene was you were the head of the library, the historical section for a period of time,
I was.
and now you are the CEO of the Montana History Foundation. That is very cool. And you're here to talk to us about the foundation.
And about the Carnegie Libraries, yeah, mostly.
So we have
Oh, cool.
a PowerPoint I'm going to bring up, so if we could just take a minute to get that going.
And our remote people will be able to see it
Yep,
as well.
I've shared it. We'll share it, and we've also emailed the handout to them.
And there's chocolate here that I expect you to eat.
Mhm.
That's part of the deal. If you're not eating chocolate, you're
5 minutes?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. sounds
5 minutes.
good. Do I need to protect them? Yeah, we'll go ahead and turn on them.
If you're not eating chocolate, you're missing an opportunity to eat chocolate.
I think I was on the founding committee of the shared library.
Well, that's just
The
what I was
shared
going to say.
catalog.
You were
Yeah,
one of
Yes.
the founding.
Karen Strege, myself, Judy Meadows, the Missoula Public Librarian. Remember all those trips to Missoula, all that windshield time with Karen and Judy.
Yeah.
And it
Deep
was,
relationships forged across the state. It's a long time ago.
I mean, real leadership from Charlene, because the staff of the the Historical Society were not ready to make a huge leap.
I know, I'm sitting
So-
here looking at the card catalogs and remembering the huge fight that we had about what a lovely piece of furniture it was and how it was time to go. Kicking and screaming. Well, you remember, Bruce. You
I
were
do.
there. was exciting.
It's
Can be done.
it's
Not
cool to
without
see how
pain.
the PowerPoint or
it's cool to
PDF?
see how the
PowerPoint's perfect, thank you.
how the shared catalog has grown, but it's even cooler to see how it's transformed the way people use their local libraries. It works.
Do you want me to be up there so I can advance the things, or do you have a remote? Does this act as a remote? I can just, yeah, I can jump up there if you want.
Yeah, why don't you? I don't see her.
We used to have a remote. We used to have a wireless.
Maybe you and I can take and remove ourselves to the flanks here.
Sitting so close to this microphone, I see that it's actually called the Snowball and not the Death Star.
Oh, really? Yeah. The Death Star was the octopus one. I still have it. My office, the
I
analog
already helped
one,
myself.
that's
so.
Good for you. Good for you.
I already helped myself.
Dark chocolate is, it's full of antioxidants. It's actually unhealthy not to eat this stuff.
Did you want to get rid of the
Oh, it doesn't matter. I can, well, unless you want people to see their comments. Up there, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Marlis, you can monitor for comments, but it.
It's hard to predict, but this year's.
I actually have dragonfly grape balls. Oh, really? I have a tank that's almost exactly the same.
White death.
It's, you just wear it under things. It's not the sweater.
Yeah.
It's like a jacket. Yeah.
I think upstairs. I think this one looks more than.
More than.
That our
Top
coffee.
upstairs?
Yeah.
Could I-
Yes. Help yourself. There's cups hanging on the wall. We've had a bit of an issue with our coffee maker.
I'll show you what
You mean
So.
it catches fire or something?
No.
cool.
Did
That's
something
Yeah,
wrong.
somebody did something wrong with it, and now it's full of mold, and so
Oh,
we're not
Ooh.
using it.
that's your bun cutting book?
Back in the good old days when the state library was down in Lindale, we had one of these big, urns with the spigot at the bottom. the
Yeah.
percolator.
Yeah.
And everyone drank that stuff, which was really deadly poison, actually. But one afternoon, I went in to grab a cup of coffee and poured myself a cup and took a big swig, and it was awful. And one of the staff, Charles, I don't know if you remember Charles, of course you do, had put something called Rinse It or something like that in there. A strong, it was a coffee, it was sort of a cleaner for those kinds of things, but it was poison. And I'd taken this big swig of poison, and it's remarkable that it really didn't taste that much different than the coffee. But he hadn't labeled the pot showing that it was being purged. So I guess I didn't die. Yeah, it's one of those good things.
And it cleaned out your system.
Yeah, it did actually. Who did that?
As you're taking your last breath when you're 102, you're going to go, it was the coffee.
I'll probably say it was not enough coffee. 102. Huh?
That's unpredictable for you, Bruce.
Yeah, I don't know.
Wow.
Sounds like Kenny's starting a pool.
Yeah.
We just all have
A
to,
betting pool.
we have to live long enough to see who's right.
We should do one of those, like the bottle. You buy a bottle of brandy, the last survivor gets to bust it open and drown the sorrows.
Somehow, I think Jenny will win.
I think so.
For obvious and obvious reasons.
Well, by way of introduction, I also wanted to mention that Charlene was the one who hired me back to Montana to come work at the Historical Society. She was the director of the research center at the Historical Society. We started there in 2000.
I think so.
Yeah, and I was hired there. I started January 2nd of 2003 after grad school. And of course, being a Montana native, it was a thrill to come back to Montana and be able to work at the Historical Society. Charlene was a fabulous supervisor. And we were just talking earlier, Charlene ensured that the Historical Society was one of the founding members of the Montana Shared Catalog when it was just 17 libraries sitting around talking about how to form something. And the Historical Society at that time was not automated at all. They were reliant on card catalogs, and one of the things I was hired to do was to come in and help do an automation for them as a member of the shared catalog.
So, it's a long
yeah,
time.
a long time.
We've come a long way together.
Yes. Yeah.
So I was sharing when I came to the Historical Society, the reference librarian had to hang up the phone to answer email because it was on dial-up, and that was 2000. And everything was card catalog, including most of the archival documents. So there was a system for online searches for archival finding aids, but only one person could use it. Knew how to use it.
Yeah.
It was the STAR system.
It was the STAR system.
Yep.
Anyway, so so there was a lot of pain,
Yeah.
a lot of anguish, a lot of gnashing of teeth, but we brought them along, and it was good. It was good.
And then we lost Charlene and her husband Clark to New Mexico for a number of years and moved back here 2-3 years ago now.
Yeah, so we went to the University of New Mexico, and then we came back 3 years ago, and so I came to take this position.
So we're very excited to have her. I've been meaning to invite Charlene to come and just tell you a little bit more about the History Foundation because we do a lot of work with them, in particular in their support of the Montana Memory Project. The History Foundation, I'm sure Charlene will talk about this, is a granting organization, and so they offer grants that do support digitization, and a number of those grants end up producing content that goes into the Memory Project, so our staff have been involved in supporting their efforts with that grant program, and they've been just a really, really terrific partner to us in that way. And then Charlene brought to us a few months ago this fabulous opportunity to think about supporting our Carnegie libraries in Montana, and I think there's an opportunity for us to think about what that might look like writ large across our library and the idea of giving. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. And good morning, commissioners and staff. So, so I'm Charlene, and I have my dream job. I work for the History Foundation, so I'm the president and CEO of 4 people. So it's a really big title. So the History Foundation was established in 1985 as a fundraising arm of the Montana Historical Society, so that you'll remember us from them. At some iteration in our past, we then also took on fundraising for the Montana Heritage Commission, Virginia City, and at some later point in between, became independent of both of those, though we hold endowments for both of those state agencies. We are an independent 501c3. We have a 14-member board from across the state and across the country. They meet twice a year, only in the summer, because a number of our, obviously, donor member trustees are summer residents of Montana. So we meet face-to-face twice a year. I guess we jiggle a lot. I don't know why.
It's our ceiling, sorry.
Oh, okay. And this is us at the Care Dam the day before it transferred to Tribal Authority. So we got a joint tour from Northwestern Energy and the tribal members who were taking it over. So we meet face-to-face twice a year, and we play, and then we work. So it's a good board. As I said, a small staff. We're based here in Helena. Our office is out by the airport, so we own a large 20,000 square foot warehouse that we lease back to the Historical Society. Pays most of our overhead every month.
Which dam did you say that was?
Care Dam in Polsny. So we're a $7 million asset foundation. That's our permanent assets, and we raise and disperse whatever about between $500,000 and $750,000 a year. So I always say the best job in the world because I raise money and then I give it away for history. So that's what I do for a living. It's a really great job.
So you'll see from our revenue pie chart, Chris, this is for you. The majority of our revenue does come in from donations, gifts, and grants every year, but we have some really nice, diverse revenue streams. One of them, a long time ago, our good friend Ward Shanahan, one of our founding board members, negotiated a gift of oil and gas royalty leases. So we don't make as much as we used to on our oil and gas leases, but that's a really nice annual revenue stream that we use for our grants program. We have earned income from rents and fees, so the rent from the warehouse, which we built for the Historical Society, paid off the mortgage and now receive rent on that. That's part of it. We own another large curatorial facility down in Virginia City. And then income for our partners' investments. So we have endowments of our own, and we hold endowments for a number of historical organizations around the state. So we have those different revenue streams. So we really do have a nice, so we don't get any government income. We're not on the general fund. We're not even connected to state government in any way. But we have a very nice revenue stream that's about a little over $500,000 annually. And what we do, we play outside a lot, and we work in communities a lot. So we raise money and then we make grants, and we support historical projects. So our grant program this year reached from Ekalaka to Libby. So we really had the entire state covered through our grants program. We also support historical project events such as the Montana Preservation Alliance Roadshow, the Museums Association of Montana Annual Conference, anything that has to do with local history, Montana history, the Montana History Conference every year, anything that has to do with preservation. We like to be involved. History Day in the schools. And we preserve Montana history project by project, as I said, from one state to the other. Last year we granted $125,000 to community organizations across the state. We're in the middle of our grant funding process. This year we have $150,000 that we raised in the interim year to give out to communities across the state in the grant program. So
what's your relationship to K-12 schools?
We do not have a direct relationship to K-12 schools, and we do not grant to K-12 schools except under specific programs. So, for example, in Potomac, we had a grant proposal funded where they were bringing in elders and children working together to collect oral history, where the kids were interviewing elders from their community and recording it in the school library. But typically we don't fund things that other foundations do. And so, for example, Denny Washington Foundation funds K-12, so we try not to do that. Nobody's funding our museums and local preservation programs really in the state. So we started as a bricks and mortar program, and I've really expanded it out to other, including digital projects. So we've really expanded that component. We give about half to bricks and mortar preservation projects and about half to libraries, museums, and outreach, education and outreach programs. So I work a lot with private donors, and I have an amazing private donor who gave me a hotel in Big Timber. So I was really excited, Bruce, because I thought finally I'd have an office in a bar, in a historic bar in Montana, and the Grand Union Hotel, right? And then the Grand Hotel in Big Timber. But anyway, we took the deed and we sold it the next day and put the money in the endowment, and that was the end of my office in the bar. But this amazing donor in Big Timber, where you have a beautiful Carnegie Library with a beautiful new addition, which she was very much a part of funding as well, is a summer resident of Big Timber. So last summer, when she was here for the summer, I went out and visited with her, and I was looking for a new project, and I was looking for something special and looking for something with statewide reach. And I asked her what she thought we should do next, the History Foundation. What should we do next? What can we do? Where should we go? What do you think I should do next? And she said, well, there's Carnegie Libraries everywhere. Those are nice buildings. You should do that. So I came back and I called Denny and I called a few other people and So what do you think about that? And we've already funded several projects in Kalispell in the Carnegie Library, which is the Hockaday Art Museum. And everybody said, yeah, let's do that, right? So we had a meeting. We called together all the librarians across the state of Montana who are still working in Carnegie libraries. There's 9 libraries still functioning. And we found out that they thought that would be a good idea. And we found out that Andrew Carnegie, between 1893 and 1919, made available grants from his corporation across the United States for free public libraries. So if you don't know the history of free libraries in Montana or elsewhere, you know, people had subscription libraries and people could get access to books. You probably all know this as librarians. But not everybody had free public access to libraries. And so, like so many things in Montana, our libraries were born in Fort Benton. And the Women's Club of Fort Benton was the original group that got together to pass a legislation in Montana and through the state to have free public libraries. They were also one of the first libraries to ask for a grant from the Carnegie Foundation to build a library. So not surprising given how much Fort Benton is a really integral part of our history. But so Montana got 17 libraries in that period of those 1,700. So a very tiny proportion of the national program, but built 17 libraries across Montana. And those communities you see there are those communities, although Great Falls and Glasgow also got libraries. So these are the ones that still exist today. There's 15 on this map. So we're missing Great Falls and Glasgow because they tore them down in urban renewal in the 60s. So we had 17, now we have 15. 9 of them still operate today as Carnegie libraries. So what does that mean for the History Foundation? Well, okay, so that allows us, if we go back, it allows us again to get across the state, have statewide reach, get into some of our smaller, but also some of our more central communities, again, places we already are, but maybe in a different way, and to help some different partners. So as I said, 9 active libraries, 3 are art museums, so still serving the public, the Hockaday in Kalispell, the Missoula Art Museum, and in Havre, a very beautiful building, a private art gallery right now, the Gray Tech. 2 are occupied by businesses. There's a law firm in the one in Bozeman. Many of you have probably seen that one in downtown Bozeman. And Chinook, actually I think the school board's in Bear Paw. It's not the Economic Development Corporation, but it's whatever the consolidated school district is called for the Bear Paw. That's the one in Chinook. There's a vacant one in Malta, and there's 2 that were torn down. This is our Carnegie Library in Big Timber. They built a beautiful addition on the back, as you probably know, that mirrors that front building. So this is one of the most distinctive Carnegie libraries we have in Montana. It's the one from Dillon, and they drew up those plans before there was a real standard plan for the Carnegie Library. So it's very distinctive. It looks like a Methodist church, doesn't it? So, okay, so I said to my donor, okay, I met with the librarians, they're in, they want this, they're interested, and here's what they told me. They told me they have historic preservation needs because they're all in historic buildings. So, and they have no money for historic preservation because they're trying to keep their doors open and the people and the children read to, right? So those are their primary issues. They had preservation issues. They had a public awareness issue that people walking off the street and ask them why the Carnegie Foundation's still paying for their library and why don't they have more services if they're funded by the Carnegie Foundation. Okay, well, none of our public libraries are funded by the Carnegie Foundation. You know that, but every Carnegie library says Carnegie on the outside of it. It's etched literally in the stone, right? Mm-hmm. So they have a public relations issue that they're always trying to fight. So they wanted a plaque inside each library that explains the relationship between Andrew Carnegie and this free public library that's run through their county or combined funding. They wanted a traveling exhibit about Carnegie and the libraries. And I wanted a book. So, you never find a librarian who doesn't want a book. So we have a very strong track record of funding historic preservation through book sales. So we did, our biggest success came with a one-room schoolhouse book, coffee table book that we did with an author, Charlotte Caldwell. We funded $90,000 worth of historic preservation projects on one-room schoolhouses across Montana through the proceeds from that book. So, went back to my donor, said, hey, we're doing it. We want to do it. We're going to move forward. Would you give me a little bit of money to get started and I'll go raise some more money? So she wrote a great big fat check, and then we went out and raised some more money, and now we have $30,000. So this is also in September, by the way. This is just in September. So we raised $30,000. We're still raising money, but we've hired an historian, and she's written 5 chapters on 5 separate Carnegie libraries across Montana. We've contracted with a photographer who's going to go out and photograph our Carnegie libraries this coming summer. We have a verbal agreement with a press to produce the book. So the photos, the historic photos from our libraries, the historic text being written right now, and then the new photos that will be taken over this coming summer, so that we can produce a book, take it to production by the fall, have it come out in January of 19. Text from the book, and the author for the book is Kate Hampton from the State Historic Preservation Office, who wrote most of the nominations. Lots of our Carnegie libraries are on the National Register for Historic Places. So I contracted with her as a private person outside of her work. So she's doing that on her own time, but she has access to all the SHPO files, obviously, as an historian. It's public record, but she wrote most of them. So she has access to those files, and so we're working on those to help us build the book, ultimately the exhibit, and also the text for the plaques. So we have kind of 2 ideas for the plaques. I think what we're probably going to do is work with the communities in which those Carnegie libraries are, get 1 donor for each plaque, and do the plaque for that library using locally raised funds with either their local Friends of the Library or the PTA or the Women's Club or whoever to do those individual plaques. But the plaque text will come from Kate's work on the book for that entry for that library. So we're way down the road already, but we're way down the road already because we had to get that book done before. So the book is completely funded. Some of that $30,000, well, most of it will go to the 2 contractors, the production of the book, and so that the idea is to fund the entire run of the book so that all proceeds of the book will then go into grant funds set aside for historic preservation for those libraries. So we imagine that by the grant cycle of calendar year 2020, we will have funding available specifically and only for Carnegie Library Historic Preservation. So that's what we're working on. I want to share with you that right now we're in the middle of our grant process, and we have a proposal from the Missoula Art Gallery for a $5,000 rehab on their front entry for the historic part of their Carnegie Library. And so that's a direct result of the work that we're doing to do the PR, get the word out, really kind of promote our Carnegie libraries as a part of our history in Montana. And this is the Women's Club in Fort Benton that started that legislation that produced free libraries in Montana. So that's it. So I wanted to share all of that with you and then say that Tracy has been integral in the process in helping liaise with us with the librarians and to get the resources back out of those communities to do the research on this book. And then to say that, for us, talking with the librarians, asking them what they wanted, asking them what they needed. I mean, I know what they need, but I can't meet all of those needs. That's not my work, but my work is really in looking at the historic part of it. So we'll have funds for preservation. We'll have funds for digitization. We'll probably have funds for things like people who want to work on building out their maps and or their historic collections. But that'll all be part, and those librarians will be part of building what those grants will cover once the money comes in. So we hope to raise, probably another $50,000 to $80,000 to put back into our libraries through this project, and to have the exhibit traveling from library to library to library in the fall of 19. So yeah, so questions?
It was
Comments?
so fun to be on a call with these librarians, and just hear them brainstorming about all of the opportunities that they saw. I think that, they kind of started out very modestly.
Yeah.
I think the idea of, maybe we could have a plaque.
Yeah.
Was a pretty modest request, and you could sense the excitement growing as they were brainstorming these different kinds of ideas.
In the communities where there is where the original library, Carnegie Library building, is no longer being used as a library, are all those communities on board? The actual working libraries on board with this project?
They are and they aren't. So as a 501c3, I can't grant to a law firm in Bozeman for his building. I can't do that. IRS prevents me from doing that. So before we could work with them to re-grant out that money, he would have to work with some kind of nonprofit locally. So he would have to build some community support for a project like that. So, they're on board in the sense that, yeah, we'd like to be eligible for funds from your grant program.
Well,
but
I guess my question is the, for instance, the Bozeman Public Library
Right.
involved in your discussions about the original?
Yes,
Yes.
the librarians love their local libraries, but it's more in the sense of helping with
No,
the
no,
local.
I get
yeah,
that.
for the historical research
Yeah.
part. So Kate's been contacting each of the public librarians in all of those communities, including Great Falls and Glasgow.
So as a comment, this to me looks wonderful. And all I can see when I look at this map here is a great bicycle trip that would take me to hit every one of those.
Yeah.
I think that would be just a kick in the pants.
Could you take the traveling exhibit with you when you go? Because I
If
heard
it's-
that the
if-
courier's not working
If
right
it's
now.
digital, yes. But the question that we all get is so here, so the Carnegie Library came about 100 years ago.
Mhm.
These were the forces that sort of caused excitement about building these buildings in these communities. But so what? What do we have going on now? What is the need for a public library in our communities now that we have the internet and the Wikipedia and all those other wonderful things? It seems to me that the state is sort of in the beginning stages of being able to talk about that in kind of interesting, useful kinds of ways. And I'm wondering, what I see when I see this is I see maybe an opportunity to basically tie this narrative that we're trying to form with this wonderful narrative that you have formed. So tying basically kind of a looking backwards narrative with a looking forwards narrative.
One of the things that Tracy and I heard from your librarians, and Jenny was on that call as well, was that historic buildings are not real conducive to our data needs. Lots of lath and plaster, lots of deep basements with thick walls that Wi-Fi doesn't travel through. So it's very challenging. And then you got all your HVAC issues, right? So all of those are challenging issues, but at the end of the day, the underlying premise for Carnegie is the same as your public librarians today, and I think it provides you a really nice narrative, especially if you're standing in Fort Benton. That Women's Club still meets in that Carnegie Library every month. It's the oldest continuous women's club in Montana. It built that library on ground donated by one of their husbands, and the whole thing. They still meet there. There's that continuity that says free public access. Now maybe what they're accessing has changed, but the free public access is still a big issue. So for us, when it comes to granting for historic preservation, I'm not going to grant you money to rewire your building, right? Because I want you to restore historic features of it. But if you don't have to worry about the plaster and the cornices and the crown moldings, then you can free up money, I hope, for your wiring and your data and your other. So I think the narratives go together really well.
So and I do too, and I see, Charlene, that your emphasis is really on the structure itself,
It has to
which
be.
it has to be, and it makes perfect sense. I'm really more interested in sociology.
Well, but I think there's an ability there, or there's an opportunity there to build that narrative and to sell it, because this is where private dollars can really help support. Because what do people love? Little kids and story time.
Puppies.
Puppies, yeah, kids reading to dogs.
Absolutely.
Bring it on, right? And you don't need data for that.
As one of my foundation friends, Charlene was one of the first persons I went to talk about this nonprofit
Yeah.
idea that we've been talking about. And, you know, we have just briefly scratched the surface of understanding how the narrative of what they're working on could support this idea that we're talking about. You know, and it's about free public access. It's also about communities. And when you look and read about what Andrew Carnegie was doing, you know, he provided some funds, but communities had real skin in the game to make sure that these were successful. And I think that's as much a part of the narrative as the kinds of services that are offering. And that's exactly what I think we're hearing as well. When we
I think so, and I think the public-private partnership is, that's absolutely the way of the future. I mean, you know this as an historian, as a person who's always cared about Montana culture. There isn't enough money to go around. That's why my grant program exists, because there isn't anybody giving money for bricks and mortar grants for these little buildings all over the state. So how do we work with those things together? Well, this is one way, and it can be really successful. And I think it's also a way for your foundation, when it exists, to really imagine things, because it's a lot. This is what I've learned over my career, from academia through the public sector and through private nonprofit. It's a lot easier to raise money for a project than it is for operations. So my operations get taken care of by my rents, but my projects get taken care of by people because they want to write checks for that. And in a community especially, and if you're in lots of communities, that's even more persuasive. So that was my advice to Jenny, and it doesn't work in every case, and sometimes you can get operation money. This same donor is one who believes. She writes me a check every year for 6 figures and says, but Charlene, you can only use it for salaries. You'll never find another donor like that in your career. I mean, it's very unusual. But, so knowing that that's unusual, you have to really think through the project fund. So I would encourage you to do that. And Amy is certainly well placed. Amy Sullivan, who sits on your RFP committee for your foundation, she's my predecessor, so she knows this story really well. So, yeah,
Other questions and comments? Aaron and Kim, do you have any questions and comments for Charlene?
No, I don't. Yeah, that's quite amazing, though. I'm impressed.
Oops.
Your speaker went off. Well, while Bruce tries to get the speaker back on, I'll just alert you to this. This is just a little fundraising piece that we take out to communities when we go and talk about Carnegie Libraries. I've provided it to Jenny. She can shoot it to you by email. If you feel like sending it out or handing it out or talking to people about it, everything you need is on there, and then just our general brochure. So.
Do you need anything from the commission to move this project forward?
No, but we'll be back. We'll be back to talk to you and give you updates. How's that?
That's lovely. Or, the least we could do is write a letter supporting this wonderful project.
You can write a check. That'd be better. Anybody can write a check. Can be $5, can be $50, could be $25,000. That would really help. Thanks, Bruce. So did we get the mic on, Tracy? I think there was a question. Are you there now?
So again, Aaron and Ken, we weren't able to hear you before. Did you have any questions or comments about the Carnegie project?
This is Ken. I didn't have any questions, but quite impressed with the project. This is pretty amazing.
Thank you. It's fun.
Thank you, Ken.
And Aaron had sent it back.
Okay, so Aaron, good. Well, good. Well, thank you very much. Please do stay in touch. This is very cool.
I do have a comment right now. We went from fairly good reception on our side to I can barely hear anybody now.
Testing. Can you hear this, Aaron? Can you hear me speaking?
I can hear you. It's just not as strong. I can just turn my speakers up if I need to.
So, so Aaron, we'll all do our best to speak directly into the Death Star. What'd you say?
Snowball.
Snowball. But if speak right up or send a text message and let us know if for some reason we're getting faint.
I think if we turn the projector off, it'll be better.
Got something
Okay.
on the projector though, so I don't want it to turn off. That's the problem. Can we? Doesn't the projector have a mic?
I disabled it because they get really bad.
But if we use that as opposed to the snowball.
Can we pull the plug on the snowball?
Well, how about this? Why don't we leave the projector on? Why don't you speak into the Snowball? You can be like you're a sports commentator from the 30s.
Like you're most often when you're moving that thing around all the time, it doesn't connect right. So you might want to completely disconnect it and reconnect it.
Okay.
Yeah, this isn't really a strong.
Yeah, I mean,
Connection.
I just completely
Yeah.
pull it out and put it all the way back in.
I apologize, Aaron and Ken, for the technical difficulties.
They say it's good now.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
We'll keep-
Okay.
keep going.
So the next item on the agenda is to talk about the draft bylaws review. So just a brief bit of history about this. We started off just basically wanting to take and kind of rethink how we elected officers for the commission. And when I was starting to, there was a committee of Ann, myself, and Jenny who worked on this. As I started drafting some ideas, I realized that that they really pertain directly to the commission's bylaws. Looking at the bylaws, I realized that the bylaws have been sort of maintained over the years by just anytime we had a new idea, adding it to the bottom of the list. And it didn't necessarily make a lot of sense. So what you see in front of you with these draft bylaws attempt to do two things. One, document a process for sort of a rational, regular way of electing officers to the commission every year, and also just a little bit of simple reordering of the bylaws to make them so that like item was with like item and they flowed better. And on your copy, I'm just going to double check this. On your copy, it should show places where there have been changes by underline or strikeouts. And then the memo which went along that was actually an informal email to the committee, and so it may be excessively informal, but I tried to explain what all those changes were. To begin with, are there any questions or comments, or should we just sort of do kind of a quick fly-through of the bylaws, and then the intent would not be to act on the bylaws at this meeting, but to act on the bylaws in our April meeting at the Montana Library Association. So, any questions or comments?
Anything in particular that you want to point out to us?
Maybe we should walk through the election process. You know, as Bruce said, the
the bulk of the rest of it is just a reordering of the information there. But the election process is I think well documented and sort of more substantiated in what we're proposing.
So basically, the way that this works is that as per normal, we have two officers. We have a chairperson and a vice chairperson. The state librarian acts as sort of the secretary, meeting organizer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we've dealt with that someplace else, but there are only two elected officers elected annually. So what we talked about is that at the last meeting of the fiscal year, which is normally in June, candidates can either self-nominate or be nominated by other people, other commissioners rather. And at that meeting, those who have been nominated can either accept or decline the nomination. At the following meeting, at that same meeting, we talk about what's happening in the next fiscal year, and then the nominees would talk about their role, how they see themselves acting in that fashion. At some point, we would have a slate of officers, of nominated officers. The first meeting of the fiscal year, which is normally in August, the vice chair and chair would be elected from that slate, and would take office and assume that office at that meeting. I also took and talked about it needs a plurality of votes, which is not unusual, and basically said that until new officers are elected, those officers have a place. So if for some reason an August meeting wasn't held, something like that, that number 4 takes care of that problem. We discussed several options in this, but the work of the committee basically pointed out that a committee of a whole isn't really an appropriate parliamentary way of doing things, and I think Marlis also was able to help us with that. And so we think that this is kind of a workable scheme. What it does is it brings the process of election of officers out into the open and makes the process public and transparent, and actually makes an attempt to tie it to the business of the commission, which is, I think, an awfully good idea. So that was kind of our thinking. I don't think that anything else is a big deal with this. There was some clunky stuff. There was some clunky stuff in section 3, number 4, about who takes place as an acting chair in the absence of the chair and the vice chair, and we tried to simplify that. It was kind of excessively complicated. And what else was in there?
Well, and that was important because that has happened before, where the chairperson and the vice chairperson were gone, and then Jenny had to run the meeting, which is not appropriate. And yeah, so that took a lot of figuring out. But at the end, we decided that the chair would appoint a temporary acting chair for the meeting if the chair and the vice chair were to be unavailable.
Much of the rest of it was, like I say, just reordering it, and then I cut and pasted stuff from statute into and created a new section, members, number 1, which is just a verbatim copy of what's in statute. But just that sort of sets the stage for how it will put together. So again, we're not going to act on this time, but we will be acting upon this at our next meeting, providing we have a motion, a seconded motion. But are there any questions or any suggestions at this time?
My question is maybe there's more information somewhere else, but is this the extent? So number 3.2. Is that the extent of the description of the chairperson's duties?
That is all there is. The bylaws are fairly Spartan. Yes. So we certainly could take and add more description to that, or we could just figure that serves, and if you don't believe it serves, it lacks detail or specificity that would be useful, then now would be a great time to take and tuck that into the bylaws.
Well, it seems to me that you do more than what is described here.
No, Jenny does more.
And it is fluid, and
It is fluid.
It's not always that way. And the duties that the chair takes on legislative years are drastically different than non-legislative years.
Right. Don't you think that should be stated? I mean, especially for people who are considering nominating others or nominating themselves, that has something to point to. And there's also some liaison work with MLA, right?
Which I have not done, frankly.
Well, you have. I mean, you presided over a meeting with MLA membership last year.
So
I don't know that was a formal role of the commission so much as MLA requesting that. So in my experience, that's the only time that kind of meeting has occurred. It's not formal in any way. I think, to Ann's point, the one additional activity that the chair does do during legislative years is testify at our legislative hearing. I think that's become tradition. I've never had a chair say that they wouldn't want to testify. I don't know if we want to formalize that as an expectation of the chair.
No, because we all testify when we're called upon. And the MLA meeting that you presided over last year, that was really the first time that I've seen a chair preside over the MLA meeting. It's usually a commission. Everybody works on that together. Or Jenny sometimes heads that up.
Is there a parallel document besides the bylaws that could be more scripted, depending on who is seated?
In terms of running the meeting, or there isn't.
More of a guidance.
Yeah, but we could certainly draft something that would be helpful.
But the other could be a little bit more.
So you're really talking about, if I'm understanding correctly, a job description.
Well, a job description, but even I'm sure I've seen this somewhere before. A mission statement of the commission itself. Right?
Well, the mission of the commission is really in statute.
Right.
And I don't remember. I don't think we referenced statute directly in the bylaws. I don't mean to be argumentative here at all, Kenning. I think these are good ideas. It started off really simple and really disorganized, and I made it slightly more organized and slightly less simple. And we can certainly take it further less simple, if that would be useful. And I take your point that someone who is considering being nominated for vice chair or for chair, it might be good to take and have a little bit more meat in there so that they understand what they're signing on for.
Some things like, that helps to formulate the agenda for the meetings, reviews those agendas, determines needs for additional reporting or ad hoc groups, that kind of thing.
I think there could be a couple of more things added to sort of create a job description, but typically the chairperson, the primary duties are to appoint committees and to lead the meeting, using parliamentary procedure. And typically the other commissioners do a lot of the things that Bruce has assumed.
That's fine. I mean, that's
So how about this, Kenny? Why don't I draft some of the, I've been taking notes while people have been speaking. Let me see if I can read my notes. And then we'll send these back out, and we'll assume that they would be tucked into this, so they kind of go under 3.2 and make some subpoints underneath there to give a little bit more specificity, and then throw in something, and other duties as assigned kind of thing as well.
I want to,
Well, unless I'm the
Do-
only
do
one
you have
who
thoughts
feels-
about this, Elsie?
feels that there should be just a little bit more in there. I haven't heard anything from Ken and Aaron.
Do you have,
You know, I was just saying, if you had a parallel document
Mhm.
that would be more prescriptive, depending on the situation, that's more fluid, time frame, the individual that sits there,
Mhm.
all of that, and even the individual that
Mhm.
takes your role,
Mhm.
because it might change.
Mhm.
You know, this is very broad, but there's broad for a reason, but I think there could be some
Mhm.
narrowness to what they do,
Mhm.
but then have more depth
Mhm.
with what does a vice chair
Yeah.
do, what does a chair do in a companion document.
I'll just say, it makes sense in my mind to have it as a companion document as opposed to in the bylaws for the operation of the commission.
we could make it even kind of informal guidelines for chair and vice chair.
Something to that effect. I wanted to look to Marlis. She's my go-to bylaws expert too, to ask if she has an opinion on where that kind of information might be best documented.
For my own personal knowledge, and I'm rather limited in bylaws, honestly, but I always feel like bylaws themselves should be as narrow as possible, just because I don't want to, it has to be this way or whatever. I like the idea of hearing of a side-by-side document. I just think that you can change a little more as things happen. Where bylaws, you have to really go forward the process, and
Right.
Those are always going to be what it says. Whereas you guys as a commission can decide that something's different this year for this chair or whatever.
So kind of a living document.
Yeah.
Sure, and it would probably be very flexible.
And it would inform the discussion that the bylaws are proposing that we have in June.
And it actually might be tied to the work plan.
Yeah.
Okay, how about this? Why don't I work with Jenny and Ann? Are you still willing?
Sure, yeah. I wanted to add that I thought that putting in the formulation of the agenda is a clear chair duty, and so that would.
I caught that.
Yeah.
At someplace here.
Yeah.
Good God. I apparently skipped the entire handwriting section of my K-12 education.
We'll grade it later.
Okay, I just want to double check with our colleagues out there in their winter wonderland. Aaron and Ken, do you have thoughts about this?
Aaron actually typed in something. Ken's written.
This is Ken. I prefer to keep it sort of simple and not add a lot in, but I'm flexible on this, so I don't have any specific comments other than that.
So Ken, you would support the idea of sort of some parallel document to sort of that would be sort of tied to the next year's work plan that would reflect needs and kind of what we learn about what the chair and vice chair need to do.
Yes, I'd rather have it in a parallel document like that than in the bylaws.
And could you read, please, Marlis, what Aaron wrote?
She says, I like connecting a living document to the work plan, something that can change from year to year as needed.
That sounds like consensus.
I'm not entirely sure I'm loud enough to be heard by that.
So Aaron, Marlis took and repeated what you had written, which sounds to me like we sort of have consensus. Is that correct? More or less? So we'll go forward and start working on that document. And otherwise, do I understand that we're going to leave the draft of the bylaws as they have been redrafted as they are until our next meeting where we will consider them for approval? Is that correct?
I do have one other question.
Okay.
Up at the top, in the members section, 1.3, this refers to my position, and it says appointed from one of the 6 units of the Montana University system. What are those 6 units?
Ann and I had a conversation
Yes.
about that as well, and again, that's lifted straight from statute.
It is lifted from statute, and I don't think statute's been updated because there are more units than 6, and they were talking about campuses. Mhm.
space at the time.
Yeah.
And now
So
I
at
think there's
least-
14. Or, yeah, I
Well,
mean,
yeah,
there,
I
there's,
never know what they count exactly. I mean, there are at least
Right.
8 between UM and MSU, right?
Mhm.
And then there are community colleges.
right, yeah, so we were thinking of changing that to reflect,
Well,
current truth, but we didn't because it comes straight from statute.
well, why, we're not required, it was our choice to take and cut and paste statute. Why don't we just simply erase the word 6?
Yeah,
Okay,
that works for me.
Would that be ambiguous? I mean, you want these to be, you use the word narrow, want the words to be defined.
But and that's what I was wondering about. But is there any ambiguity about what is a unit of the university, Montana University system?
Yeah, there's a lot of
Yes.
ambiguity with that.
Oh, there is? Oh.
Yeah, what is a unit?
But when I looked on the border regions, I think they said 14.
Huh.
But I don't, but there's not an agreement. A consensus on that.
Okay, so these are deeper. I thought we were wading across a stream that was ankle deep.
Can we get a legal opinion?
I think 6 units is
I think, yeah.
at this point. I mean,
Yeah.
Who knows what that is?
So what if we stay tied to statute, we're
Mhm.
kind of safe.
Well, I think we're ambiguous.
Well,
If somebody
but we're-
says, well, am I eligible to be appointed from the
Mhm.
Montana University system? I mean, how do we define that?
I think this is a question that we need to raise with the commissioner.
May I ask
Mhm.
formally that
Yes.
you want me to contact him, or you want to contact him?
I'll,
Or
I'll contact him, that's
that'd be
fine.
great.
Well, it would be good to ask the commissioner that anyway, because it's my understanding that they don't actually reappoint someone every 3 years.
They do, we do. It, we
Oh,
we
okay.
might let that lapse accidentally,
Oh,
but we
okay.
do have a 3-year reappointment.
Okay, I was
Okay,
remembering
so
Brett
good catch.
not
So we'll
knowing
pursue that.
Exactly, and that's what brought
He
it,
wasn't informed, but maybe
yeah,
you were
exactly.
informed.
We
Okay.
had to bring that to their attention.
And then if you want to be more
Mhm.
precise with it, annotate the section of law that it comes from.
Yeah.
Then we know for sure that it's not just necessarily
Oh, that's good.
random, but that if section 1 does come out of code specifically, honor that and annotate it.
We can do that. Actually, in the original draft it was, but it seemed excessively librarian-ish.
No, they're legalese.
And then we also need to worry about the 6 units. Okay, and Jenny's going to work on that, and I can work on that too if there's anything I can do that's useful. Okay, so any other comments or suggested changes to these bylaws before we? So
For my own notes, to be clear, Anne had said that she felt that you should add in about the commissioner drafting the agenda. Was that in the written document or in the?
that would be in the sort of the ongoing job description, the how to do this job good,
The accompanying document.
the accompanying document. You know, chairing the Montana State Library Commission for Dummies is what we'll call it. It'll be a bestseller, I'm sure. Okay. So here we are at 11:29. Do we have lunch coming in?
We do.
Lovely. Okay. It looks to me we're ready to move on to commission goals and objectives. And we have several linked items from our agenda here. The first is the scope of work draft. Is that correct?
Oh, this is from our reporting task force, yes.
Okay.
This is that ongoing work. So a couple of things that I wanted to talk about, and Ken, I didn't know if you had an opportunity or wanted to share anything from your exploration of the use of Esri Insights.
I could add a few comments. I don't have a demonstration
Okay.
at this point, but I can do that now, or I can do it whenever it's appropriate here.
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Well, we sat down for a conference call a few weeks ago, and played with a little bit of the data from that the library had prepared in the past, and part of that came from existing library level, individual library levels around the state, previous maps that had been published, and then we looked at the budget projections for the last several years, sort of in aggregate, and a little bit of other operations information. And Insights, just again to remind all of you, it's a separate and new product that is based on ArcGIS Online, and it works now in both the in-house version, which is called Portal, and it works with the one that Esri hosts of ArcGIS Online, the sort of software as a service where they store the data, they store everything. But in either case, you're running this in a web browser, and it's an analysis tool, but it does have, I think, some direct bearing on reporting in the future. Right now, and it's an add-on to ArcGIS Online as a software service of about, I think it's $500 a year per user. It's not part of the state, as I understand, it's not part of the state. Forget the exact term of it, but it's basically the contract that the state has with Esri for all the different software. So it's a bit of an anomaly right now in terms of access to it. It can be set up through the resources we have at the state library, but given time and effort and staff cuts and everything else, it's not yet really available to staff internally at this point in time. So I just did some exploration of my own. I have explored the products more recently or since that meeting. I think it really has the best. It's in essence what it does is it in a fairly new way compared to the old way of doing GIS or the traditional way we've done for many years. It allows drag and drop of a spreadsheet, for instance, an Excel spreadsheet that's brought in as a table, or from layers that are published on ArcGIS Online. So it's more limited than accessing all the GIS data, that's available to a normal GIS analyst. So I really view it as a tool that has going to have broad applicability for people just like they would use a spreadsheet nowadays or a calculator in the old days. So it's really an analytical tool. It's still in its infancy in terms of telling a story or providing a reporting function, but it does have some capability, and I've explored that more than when we had our call. So for instance, for us as commissioners, being able to access this information and use it to supplement the Federation reports or any of the other operations we have as commissioners, there is the ability to publish what are called pages in a fairly dynamic and live way. So it's got potential to, I think, be useful to commissioners as well in a kind of a read-only way. In essence, when you have a map or you have a table of information, and you can generate additional maps from that, or you can generate essentially a table like a spreadsheet view, or you can view charts and graphs. And there's a lot of fairly interesting charts and graphs that go beyond normal Excel pie charts and bar charts, for example. So its strengths are not really in looking at a table like the great graphics that the staff put together for us to look at our budgets, and as we're dealing with the cuts at the annual budgets over the years in those sort of stacked side-by-side bar graphs that were provided. Its real strength is burrowing down in more detail and to be able to filter things very quickly and easily. And it's a drag and drop type interface that can be used with any browser, so you don't have to load any software, which is nice. So you really get to the bottom of things, and as one example, I was showing some things from a housing study we're doing there in Lewis and Clark, Broadwater, and Jefferson County, and we were looking at things like we brought in 48,000 structures in those 3 counties. So translating that to the library world, we could look at all all the libraries in the state, and a user could quickly look at which of those use different of funding, how much money they spend on different types of activities like continuing ed, et cetera. And it's much unlike the GIS where you have to type a query like a database query. You can do all this with just a click and a filter, and all the maps and charts are tied together. You imagine a dashboard in front of you with 3 or 4 graphs and charts and the map, and then a table, a summary table of the values. You can click on one and it instantly shows up in all the others. So it's more of an efficiency thing. If Jenny or Tracy or anyone else is preparing some Excel graphs and charts like they did for the commission, that's probably best done just in Excel, although there's a few time-saving things maybe with Insights, but it's really going deeper at a granular level where it excels. And that's where I think this is. And it would help me, probably because I'm a kind of a map person, and I think that way and I work that way, and it's my profession. I always want to kind of look at maps and sort of narrow things down that way. Others prefer to do it in other ways, like through reports or graphs. But because we have this ability to show those views, previous analysis, and then publish those in a dynamic way so that the user can actually click on a few things and get a better picture of what's going on, I think it has quite a bit of potential to explore, but I see it more in the future once staff have the ability to get comfortable with it. It doesn't take a lot to learn it. It's a lot simpler than desktop GIS, for instance. So I think it's got a lot of applicability. It's the kind of tool that I would see being very valuable to the consultants and the leadership staff, and even it saves some time even at the analyst level, but it's primarily for those that aren't GIS analysts, I think, and who need to crunch the numbers and get a better idea and have better, no pun intended, but better insights into what's going on. And some fairly complex things. They use what's called the D3 graphic models or programming interface that's used by the New York Times and other national media groups. And so anything that's in there, so there's some very unusual and potentially useful graphs that help to show the quantity and relationships between things. So a lot of potential, but I think it's something we should bring into the discussion, but it's still a little bit in the future in terms of the ability to get up to speed with it.
Thank you very much.
So Ken, when you say drag and drop your page, what kind of data sources are you talking about?
Anything that can be put into you either load this through a spreadsheet, so an Excel spreadsheet that can be loaded in. It doesn't have to have a map component, but if it does have an address or a latitude, longitude, or something like that, or it can be tied to something that's already online, like a list of counties or a list of libraries. So if you have a map of all the libraries in the state, and you have an Excel table that has columns that include the name of the library, you can relate it via the name, and then you can show all the information in your spreadsheet by library. So you could, instantly look at anything that's tied to that library via the spreadsheet that you load. It has the ability, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but it has the ability as well at the port with the in-house version, which the library has, if it has the capability, but not currently the wherewithal to get done in a short, to have people staff and up and running with it. It has the ability to cross over between multiple databases, so you'll read an Oracle database or a SQL database or any other database directly. It handles very large, millions and millions of records if necessary. So there's some a variety of ways to do that, but most commonly, at least right now, it would be fed via a spreadsheet, combined with whatever maps are already out there in terms of geography.
And who would have access to it?
The people that have a license to use it, anybody that has ArcGIS Online that chooses to support this. So primarily in our case, it would be the staff at the library, and then they would communicate with us as commissioners, for example, or possibly with the consultants could use this with for instance, planning on where to expand courier coverage or providing assistance as in a consulting basis with the libraries out there. They could, publish these, they're called pages, and a page could include maps, graphs, and charts, and tables. They could publish these for us to use on our tablet or phone, or, well, probably not on the phone, but on a tablet or on a computer. So, it would supplement, for instance, I could see it supplementing the Federation reports and playing a big role in that. Anything that's at a more granular level, I can see it being really useful for, the great work that Aaron and others did last year in terms of looking at the history of MLIA. It's great at time series data, where you have data that has that you have for multiple years or multiple time units of any kind. It'll break them down automatically, and it recognizes the date and time field and allows you the flexibility to work with that in any combination.
Okay, thank you.
So a couple comments that I would make. Tracy and I looked at insights with Ken, and I agree that I think there's a lot of applicability there. I know Tracy's also been doing a little bit more looking into different kinds of tools, and staff have looked at Tableau, which the state has a license for as well. And so there's some good dynamic reporting tools out there. One of the other things that we're evaluating the need for is more of an integrated package of tools that can support communication and project management as well as reporting. We've found tools that have sort of bits and pieces of what those needs are amongst our staff. If we sort of think holistically about what we're trying to accomplish, we're trying to have tools and resources that allow us to use data to help us prioritize the work of the state library, and then to communicate and effectively administer those programs. So we're looking for some kind of tool that can help us coordinate all of that and then produce meaningful information for staff and managers and ultimately the commission to understand if we're being successful in our work and to drive that work forward. We haven't found what that ultimate tool might be. If people have suggestions, we're all ears. We're exploring bits and pieces. We've talked to OPI a little bit about something that their staff is using. I think it's called Work. It's not spelled like work, so I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. So
Right. I think it's Reichs, and it's really been extremely helpful. I don't want to be a data warehouse. I want to have a data culture, and it's an ebb and flow of things, but it's about governance as much as it is of who owns it. So you can't say that the time frame didn't happen, and then you point to the employee or to the position if the employee is no longer there. But it helps management, not so much as myself, as much as all the linear management. And not just linear, because data is accepted all over from the agency.
So we're waiting for Mike Sweeney to come back from being gone.
His mother's passed.
Oh, shoot. And when he gets back, we're hoping to get a demo from them. So, those efforts are moving forward, albeit somewhat haltingly given staff resources. But if you look at the scope of work for the reporting work, there is a parallel need in understanding exactly what data we want to collect and report on. We've talked about this idea of what are the success indicators for the state library that would demonstrate whether or not we are successfully doing our jobs. And as you all know, our ability to report and understand data is really driven by the questions that we're asking. What are those questions that we should be asking of ourselves that demonstrate that we are being successful? And that is where I feel like we could really use some more input from the commission. We think amongst ourselves what kinds of questions we're asking ourselves. Certainly staff are very motivated to think about the kinds of data they want to collect when working on their day-to-day tasks and projects that they work on. What kinds of questions would you as commissioners have for us that you feel might tell you whether or not we're successfully meeting our goals? And that will help inform us in the kinds of data we need to be collecting and ultimately reporting to you.
It seems to me there's a couple schools, couple kinds of data. You can parse it. There's some data that we just have to report on. Some of that's financial, some of that's relating to IMLS, and they just require certain data sets. If you don't give it to them, they don't give you money. I mean, those kinds of things I think are fairly straightforward and fairly easy to catalog. What you're asking for, I think, is considerably more interesting and probably more valuable in the long run. And actually, just as a charge to the commission, that's a fairly challenging charge.
It is.
And I think
This is Ken again. One of the things I think I completely agree that it is a challenge, but it is really critical because it guides in what kind of tools you need, really. And I kind of think of them as defining more key performance indicators, which is it's a tough job no matter what, but it's a little easier when they're objective and measurable or quantifiable. But yeah, we have also a lot of key performance indicators that are more fuzzy and that are more subjective, and how to balance those is tough. But I think starting with at least brainstorming ideas on key performance indicators that are objective and measurable, and preferably those that can be more or less automated or done in a way that they don't take as much time to quantify. We don't have a lot of sensors out there, but we do have recording that happens regularly that can be brought into that. But that's a start, I think.
Our staff are great about thinking about what we can measure, how we can measure it, but we want to make sure that we're collecting that data that's meaningful.
Well, and I think you're asking a really good question, but it would help spur my thinking if I could see a menu of that kind of data that your staff are proposing collecting. I think tools like this are incredibly valuable when they're used correctly. Our Office of Planning and Analysis uses Tableau very effectively to really help inform a lot of discussions. And I don't have a preference as to which tool. I think you clearly have expertise with Ken here in terms of Esri systems, but it would help me to answer your question to see what that menu of possibilities is that your staff are thinking about.
And we have a table of data that we've collected over the past year, as well as some suggested success indicators. So we can send that out and certainly build upon it. A lot of the metrics are just the standard metrics, and then there's also project-specific metrics that are specific to individual work. I'll gladly send that out.
Any more discussion about this?
Well, I just wanted to share one thing with you. And Ken, I hope you're pleased by this. I didn't get a chance to share it with you sooner. We are required by statute to prepare an annual report that's submitted to the governor. And this was something that was always done by our communications coordinator with support from the state data coordinator. And so those were two positions that we obviously lost to the budget cuts. And so this was one responsibility that I took on, of course, working with our staff to pull together the content of. But we decided to try to make use of some of the technology we've been talking about. So this is, I think, nearing a final draft of the FY17 annual report created in an Esri story map. And I'll just kind of briefly walk you through it. I won't spend a lot of time on the content, but just sort of the layout and organizational structure. We were a little bit delayed getting this out so I could take training on how to actually use this kind of technology. One thing we have learned in our exploration of story maps is that the more rich media we have, the more dynamic the reports will be, and so that's going to be a charge to our staff, is making sure we're collecting that kind of rich media, and so you'll see a little bit about what we're talking about. So this is what's referred to as a cascade story map. The organizational structure I followed was based on an annual report from another organization that had used a similar story map for their annual report. So we start with a little bit of a year in review, our mission statement. In the year in review, I focused specifically on our work to develop our new strategic framework. Again, keep in mind that this was June or July of 2016 through June of 2017. So that's the historic framework. So lots of text. When you're at the top, you do have the opportunity to move through some bookmarks if you don't want to scroll through the content, if you want to just dive right in to those specific areas. There's some information just about our divisions. This is one area where we should perhaps get some imagery of our central services staff and some icicles. Yeah. We do have winter photos of the library. That's one thing we do have. A map of where our staff work around the state and some information about who they are. Just a little update on some of our significant staffing changes in our org chart. Information about our commission and councils. So a lovely photo of all of you, along with, again, information about who you are. If I can get it to come up in your photos. Information about our Network Advisory Council and where they are. Information about MLIAC and where they are. And then we move into some of the accomplishments of the agency. So the first accomplishment noted is the joining of the DPLA by the Big Sky Country Digital Network. This is actually a linked page out to the DPLA site, and it looks like their content's not coming up very cleanly right there.
That's not a bullet hole, is it?
In the wall? Isn't that funny?
It really bothers me.
Yeah.
On the target on the library.
Yeah. You need to have
We had a bad meeting one time.
You need information about our LSTA evaluation and planning process that we went through. Information about how we changed up our MSL workshops this year. Traditionally, that's always been a multi-day event here in Helena, and this past year, staff took it on the road. And so some information about the workshops, information about who attended those workshops from where. Some additional descriptive information about the workshops.
Who's that guy?
It's amazing.
Information about our recording studio that we dedicated and Karen Kenninger's visit.
She was so cool. It was really a pleasure meeting her.
Our migration to the State of Montana Data Center, and then we conclude with our financial review.
That's very cool.
That's very cute.
That's great.
Thank you.
So that displays in any browser?
It displays in any browser, I believe. We build. They can't be built in IE. I know that for sure. They have to be built in Chrome or Safari. So, and I'm displaying this in Chrome here.
Is this available on the public net?
It will be. It's not yet, but it will be. Yeah. So right
So what
now.
did last year's report look like?
Last year's report was a PDF
Just a
document.
PDF.
Just a PDF.
Yeah,
Not interactive.
in any way, yeah, so it's,
So Jenny, you will submit this purely electronically to the governor's office? Is that what you've done in the
Yeah.
past?
Siri, here's your report.
Yeah. So you'll
So we just
And
show,
can you
like,
sign it?
for auditors, I always have to give them our annual report, so we'll just show them on, I just pointed to them online.
Right, so we have a publications page on our website. I've submitted them electronically to the governor in the past with an email or a letter that says that it's our annual report. Let's see,
And
so.
can you take the new technology and software you're using to create the report? Can you put it easily and print it out into a hard draft form?
That is a challenge. I don't
Okay.
believe we have
Sorry.
the capacity to do that.
That's exactly the question I asked. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah,
With the Alice world.
But
yeah.
again, this particular format of story maps, you cannot. The journal story map format, you can dump to a PDF. But it's a suggestion we made to Esri several times because it's pretty essential that you be able to, dump this to a PDF or something.
Can you flip back to that report for a second?
Yeah, so Elsie, I was just pointing out to you, this was our
That was the
annual
last
report
one,
yeah.
from last time, and this is just a PDF document
Yeah.
online.
So how much interactivity is there? I mean, if you mouse over these charts, for instance.
The charts are not, oops, sorry, the financials, these are not interactive.
But all the other maps up there with you guys.
The staff and where
Yeah.
they live.
Yeah.
So, and Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, if we were using Esri Insights to feed something like this, then we could have more interaction with the data behind it. Right now, this is just a static graph that I built using a Excel spreadsheet.
Right, and that's exactly correct. And so that's the capability. And that I've been told by Esri that they're working on that reporting function more this year as this was the first rollout of Insights. But yes, you would be able to click on a part of the pie chart and see the representation on the map in an interactive way. So that and more is coming that way. So that will increase the capability.
And on this map in particular, what does the green indicate?
Those are counties that do not have libraries, public libraries.
Question was, what do the green counties on the map signify? Counties that don't have libraries.
One of the other drawbacks of this particular story map is that there's not a way to import the legend from the map that this was built. And so one of the suggestions that I read online was to try to give some visual clues in your content, your textual content to what the information means. And so that's why there's some color in the description. But that's a current limitation of the technology as well.
How does this seem to you? Is this useful to the governor and to the executive generally? Is this a good format?
I think it's a great format. It's really exciting to be able to, have a little bit more interactivity, probably more information you can put on it in a PDF.
When is it going to be available on the website?
Well, we're essentially in final draft at this point, so as soon as we work out, there's a couple of bugs in some point locations that Evan and I were troubleshooting yesterday that we couldn't figure out, and I'm waiting for some content summary from the Heritage Program to add, and then it can go online.
But you'll let us know when
Yep,
it is.
absolutely.
And then I think Jenny's goal is it'll make it a lot easier producing every year.
Yeah, if we can use a template. One of the things we're talking about, we haven't made any final decisions, is using our Esri Enterprise License Agreement. We have some credits available to work with their professionals to actually build us a professional template that we could use going forward. So something for us to continue talking about. Yeah. And I didn't have to learn Adobe InDesign, so that was good too.
Well, moving ahead in the agenda, thank you very much. That does look lovely, and it looks like it could serve, and clearly there's other applications for it as well. And I think, Ken, as you hear of any changes that make it easier for us to take and spin this off into other media forms, that would be very, very useful. You can almost see this driving everything from sort of one-page brief introductions to some of the state library services to PSAs and things like that. So.
Perhaps the
The other,
I know you really.
the other sorry, this is Ken again.
Go ahead, Ken.
Didn't want to interrupt someone. The other thing I think that's powerful with this, it's not really appropriate in this instance as a report such as this, but for this kind of tool interacting with others, you can also, embed Survey 123 links in here, so and crowdsource. So you can embed other applications. This is a bit, besides just providing a map, so you can get some interactivity going with the users. So it's also can be more of a two-way street in other contexts, not in this particular one though.
At OCLC, they always had this little app that would show up in the corner of a online slideshow, that would show you the things that were streaming into WorldCat, into their catalog at that moment. It was sort of a live view of, and it was. It was of no earthly use except for, as an analytical tool. But it was interesting to see that the library is a growing organism. That things were happening. It was dynamic, and we could be mapping today's Courier. There's 49 items from Drummond to Missoula moving today, and things like that would testify to the dynamic nature of library services and document those, as well as be great eye candy.
Yeah. Well, to use to tell the story.
Exactly. Exactly. The story that was being told at OCLC, the at first glance was of really no import, but when you looked, and this was the 12 billionth item or something that was being added, and it was coming from some library federation in India, that really took and told a really powerful story, and I think that we would gain some advantage of that as well here with these kinds of tools. I can see getting a whole new station, internet station for this. Okay, so calendars.
Calendars.
Looks to me like there's some federation meetings that are about to happen.
Broad Valleys is next week.
Broad Valleys. In Ann, are you going to Broad Valleys? Great, thank you. Do we have commissioners signed for Sagebrush and South Central?
I don't think we've assigned anyone yet.
Do we have a volunteer to go to the Sagebrush meeting on March 3? I'm going to be gone, sadly.
That's one that Connie usually attends. Obviously, I don't know if she'd be available to attend at this point, given her surgery.
Well, let's note that we don't have a commissioner for that. Who is going to South Central? That is Tracy. You're going up there? I could go with you if you'd like. If there's. Oh, okay. It's going to be
in Hardin.
In Hardin. Good God. Do we have any volunteers for the Hardin?
What is the date of that?
March 10.
March 10th. I need to double check my schedule. I know I haven't committed to any of these, not knowing for sure exactly what the job is to do within that. So education will have to occur. But I do want to participate, but I need to check schedule as well.
Sure.
But Hardin would be a fun one to do.
It's a ways. It's a ways.
Yeah, well, let me know. I'm happy to talk you through one of those meetings.
I appreciate that, Jenny.
It's mostly listening.
Good.
It's mostly listening.
Yeah.
So you need the March 3 and the March 10?
That's correct at this point.
And
So which one's which then?
So Sagebrush is going to be held
On the 3rd,
in Miles City.
Yep.
Miles City.
you are going to have Tracy?
And then the 10th is Hardin.
So put me tentatively down for the March 10th. And we'll be seeking other lodging, I think. I think my wife will divorce me for that one. Because I will have been gone for 10 days previous to that. And then do we have someone who's going up to Shoto for the Pathfinder?
To Fort Benton. Do I have Shoto written?
Oh, it's
When is that?
Mm-hmm.
Shoto County.
Oh,
Shoto
Yes,
County
sorry,
Library.
sorry,
yeah.
my fault. Yeah, so we have a
Yeah, this is Erin. I'd actually like to put it in my calendar and make it this time.
Oh, perfect. Great. That'd be great.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That'd be great. So,
And Anne, you're going to Broad Valleys?
so we have Broad Valley's covered, and we have and we don't have Sagebrush covered,
And we're in
although
Sagebrush
perhaps
to Miles
Elsie
City.
Miles, and it looks like I'm going to Hardin on the 10th. I'll bring Sue. That'll be good. And let's see, the next one that's coming up after that is the Pathfinder, so that is Aaron. And what else do we have?
Golden Plains.
Golden Plains on the 19th of April.
Mm-hmm.
So that's fairly soon after
MLA.
after
Mhm.
MLA.
Golden
Mhm.
Plains location.
Is in Wolf Point. Oh, it's
I'm-
even farther. Plentywood.
It's in Plentywood.
Mm-hmm.
bring Sue or bring Scranton West.
Mm-hmm.
I might be able to do that one.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
Kenning, that'd be great.
great.
Yeah, the birding is good. Actually, that'd be a good time to be in West Bay.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned it.
What's good?
Bernie, his wife's a burger like me, so.
You said burning.
Burning Librarian Conference, yes. And then the Tamarack meeting, Ken, will you be able to go to that on May 11th and 12th?
Sorry, I was on mute. I cannot. I'm going to be in Australia.
Mhm.
That'll be harder.
That's a big
My
one.
grandson,
In Big Fork.
A new grandson, he said.
Oh, exciting.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
So that's May 11th and 12th.
I can make that as well.
That would be great.
Okay.
That would be great, because I will be unavailable. That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll make those notes.
So then also to add to your calendar, we have the Montana Library Association meeting, which is in Bozeman this year, April 11th through 14th. Will we have a booth?
We will have a booth. So our commission meeting will be the morning of the Wednesday,
Which is the
11th.
11th. Good.
We will have a booth at the conference. We have the conversations with the commission the morning of the 12th, that Thursday morning. So we want to talk a little bit about what we want to talk about at that meeting. That's a chance again for the commission to be there to talk about the work that we're doing and also to listen to librarians and trustees about what's going on in their worlds. And then Erin wanted me to make sure that we put on your calendar a session that she's offering on, I believe it's Friday morning. Is that right, Erin?
Yes, on Friday.
Excellent.
Good.
So we'll be coordinating those registrations. Again, typically if you're a librarian and would be attending MLA anyway, we ask that you go ahead and register. If you're attending early or staying days that you wouldn't normally be there, we'll pay for your transportation and lodging for any time that you would not normally be there, or if, for other commissioners, we'll certainly cover those expenses as well.
And I think that the conference registration is open. Is that not correct? I think it's open now.
So, sorry, just to recap, the commission meeting is on the 11th.
Is that the Wednesday? I don't have.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's on, and then the conversation with commissioners on the 12th. I presume the morning?
In the morning.
In the morning.
Yeah.
Does that really mess you up?
I-
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, if you
double booked.
if you can't do it, you can't do it. But yeah, we understand that it's hard to be in two places at once. So one of the other things on our calendar is the legislative day in Washington D.C. I saw that on the calendar.
May 7th and 8th, I think it is.
Yes, May 7th and 8th, Monday and Tuesday, I presume. So to sort of a timeout, so in the interest of total transparency, I think we probably should have an open process of deciding which commissioner goes to that. I guess I have always assumed that the chair normally went to that. That was part of the glories of being chair.
Another thing.
Yeah.
And I made note of that on the back.
Yeah.
But maybe that assumption is incorrect.
Yeah, we've traditionally taken turns in the last many
Yep.
years.
Yep.
So what do you think that the state library and Montanans are best served in terms of our strategy? Do you want to do a rotation? Want to send chair? Want to draw lots? How do you want to do this?
I think a lot of pardon, but a lot of times it was who could do it even too, who even could even get their name in to even do it. And then I think it went to kind of who hasn't done it lately and
So it's been who's available first.
yeah,
And then who hasn't been.
in the past.
Because ideally, all of the commissioners can step in and speak on behalf of the commission.
That's true.
And just so you know, there's the 7th is a day that the American Library Association puts on to review their legislative priorities. And then the Tuesday is Hill visits, and Marlis always coordinates those for us. Of course, our biggest point that we always talk about with our delegation is LSTA funding and the importance of LSTA funding. There's other topics that we'll often bring up, including services to veterans, services to youth and kiddos, net neutrality often will come up, the need for broadband, and then if there's other kinds of legislation going forward, like the National Geospatial Data Act, we'll bring up those kinds of issues as well.
Aaron and Ken, what do you have thoughts on this?
Just to let you know, I won't be available to go this year.
I'm in the same boat in terms of being in Australia. I don't really feel strongly one way or another. I think it's a great experience. So rotating it would be. I mean, I haven't been, but I assume it is. I've been to other Hill visits there on behalf of the library. So I don't really have a strong feeling one way or another in terms of the process, but I can't go this year.
So it sounds to me like the consensus is generally that we basically create a pool of all the commissioners who are interested and able to go, and then we would come up with a scheme for selecting from that group. Does that seem like a rational way of proceeding?
Yeah, it seems like drawing lots at that point makes sense. Once you've decided who the pool is.
So Kenning's suggestion is that we create a pool and then we draw lots.
What is drawing lots? Just drawing names?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Or we could do by who hasn't gone, which is what we've traditionally done.
So that's would you be comfortable with that? So why don't we do that right now? Why don't we, who is able and interested in going to DC on, I'm sorry, the May
Yeah.
May 7 and 8.
May 7 and 8?
Mhm.
No, I can't be right. 6 and 7.
It's, yeah, I think it is,
It was,
because it's Monday.
Monday and Tuesday?
Yeah.
Today.
We don't have Connie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we don't have Connie.
May 7 and 8 is Monday.
Did Connie go last year?
Connie went
The year before?
year before last.
Year
Yep.
before last?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 7 and 8.
So so Aaron has opted out this year, and Ken will be admiring the babe, the new babe. Kenning, are you interested?
I would have a hard time going. I might be able to make it work, but I would have a hard time. And I went last year. I mean, I paid my own way, but I went last year.
And you're interested, Ann?
Sounds like it's a non-decision.
I think, why don't you get to go?
Fine, but we didn't have to.
Oh, no, I think,
Kelsey.
I think, if we set a plan together, what specific Montana wants to add to the pot, to the national pot, I think that's important. It's wonderful if somebody wants to go, but it's more of the ideas and the mission of what Montana wants to send as words.
Good.
But good?
You want to go too, though?
Nope, I'm good. I'm good.
He's going to Hardin.
Well, by the
It's a good
Yeah.
point.
by the measures of our discussion, I went last year, so I would be ineligible.
Yeah,
So,
but what if we found a way for two?
well, I think given our financial situation, that we'd be better off using the money to.
And that's another
For something
question,
else.
should any of us go? When we have,
I think
Jenny's
it's
going.
I think it's an important thing to do. My sense is that
And
I mean, if we lost LSTA, we've lost the heart of what the state library does, and we can't do that.
And your budget's okay because you guys opted for, until we knew what was coming out of the special session, not to charge us for the thing, so the money is there in your budget.
And frankly, I did enjoy going. I thought I would not enjoy going, and I enjoyed it very much. It was very educational, and I think that we were as effective as we could be given the contingencies. For instance, we didn't have a representative. So it was that was a tougher sell.
Right.
But I'm happy to have someone else go. It's good. I just really want I just want our voice to be heard. I want them to hear what we need. Okay, so that's a good. So we've made decisions about that, and let's see. Conversation commission. Should we do that offline and just kind of put together a short list and then circulate that list amongst commissioners and see? Seems to me that we need to talk about sort of an update. We have foundation, we have the effects of the budget cuts on the state library and our future plans going forward. We can talk about some of the initiatives that we're currently undergoing RFPs for, in which we'll have more details. But there may be something larger that we want to incorporate that as well. Introduce people to the brand spanking shiny new annual report.
Yes.
So I think that there'll be some things to talk about. We may want to take and identify something that we want to learn from the people who are coming to that session, so we can use this as an opportunity to do some listening as well. Does anyone have any to add to that short, incomplete list? I would welcome staff ideas as well.
I had thought that we would spend a bulk of the time on the nonprofit idea, since that was the focus from last year. It seems right to follow on with the progress that we've made, and I think my sense is, in talking to people, people are anxious to hear more about
Eager
to hear
to
more
hear
about the progress that we're making, and how they can support it, and how the nonprofit idea will support their work as well.
Yes.
And, and that it's non-threatening.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other items to be considered by this body before we adjourn for lunch? comments?
Should we do
Yeah.
the work?
Yeah, public comments? You guys are public. Well, thank you for coming. I assume you're here for lunch as well? Good?
Yeah, I have to leave in about
Oh, okay.
Oh, oh dear.
You need
So,
to share where you're going. Not right now, but I mean.
in about 3 hours I'm leaving for Thailand.
Oh.
no kidding.
Isn't that exciting?
Wow.
Wow.
We should give her some
So
homework.
she
to
should
report
not
back
be
on
late,
library.
guys.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Priorities.
I know, that's exciting.
But do you have any words of wisdom for us?
Mhm.
I mean, how do we move forward? I mean,
Well-
you and I have had this conversation.
And Siri, maybe I can ask you some pointed questions that I was going to ask you. in a
Should we
few
adjourn
minutes.
first, or is this part of public comments?
Maybe we should adjourn and move into our work session.
Meeting's adjourned. Now ask pointed questions.
Okay. When Bruce and I were visiting with you last, you talked about the idea of tying any new funding to specific needs. And I think what I want to share with the commission